Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm doing a long awaited video. I'm going to be doing my book video for you all. I'm not going to go on and make excuses. I think this is my April to August books. So obviously I was writing my dissertation, my essays and my dissertation during this time, so there were kind of weeks went by when I didn't read anything apart from kind of essay related stuff. But I've got a huge pile here. I'm just going to try and show it to you guys. Now, because there are so many books here, I'm probably just gonna speed through this more than I usually would. But good news is that book videos from now on will be a lot better, I think, because I have a lot more attention to give to them. My plan is to make this a monthly thing, just that we've got like probably minimum like 4 or 5 books so we can talk about them a little bit more in depth. Also, I will hopefully do them often enough that I will be able to remember things a bit better about the books. And I'm also planning to write reviews, maybe not on absolutely everything that I read, but I'm going to write reviews as I go along throughout the month, and then I'm going to publish them all at once my monthly book video is uploaded. So I hope that makes sense. Having said that, I'm probably not going to do a September one just because I've got a couple big book videos that I'm filming for you guys today and I don't want to overload you with book themed content. So I'm probably going to do my next one at the end of October and just do a September and October books. Oh my god, this pile of books keeps collapsing. This is for my book haul, by the way, you guys, so if you're interested in a book haul, that is coming to you. Now on to book club for the end of October. I've got 2 choices this time because I wanted to choose a man booker long lister, just because I think it might be nice to read something really recent and that's getting a lot of buzz at the moment together. But I know that new books are expensive and I didn't want to make this like super inaccessible, so we've got 2. I've also decided to choose The Giver by Lois Lowry. I'm sure that lots of you guys have read, you've told me you've read it before. I've never got round to reading it, so I thought this might be a nice excuse to read it. Lots of you guys can get involved. If you wanted an excuse to read it and you've never read it before, then this is your excuse. I'm going to read the back of The Giver now. So, life in the community where Jonas lives is idyllic. Designated birth mothers produce new children who are assigned to appropriate family units, 1 male, 1 female to each. Citizens are assigned their partners and their jobs. No one thinks to ask questions, everyone obeys. The community is a precisely choreographed world without conflict, inequality, divorce, unemployment, injustice, or choice. And I think it's obviously about a character that is ready to break out of that. So in terms of my booker choice for the book club, I'm going to do Normal People by Sally Rooney, just because it's unlike lots of things that I've been reading for book club, so I thought it might be a nice choice. So the blurb for this is: Connell and Marianne grow up in this can't speak. Connell and Marianne grow up in the same small town in the west of Ireland, but the similarities end there. In school, Connell is popular and well-liked, while Marianne is a loner who has learned from painful experience to stay away from her classmates. When the 2 strike up a conversation in Marianne's kitchen, awkward but electrifying, something life-changing begins. Finally, guys, last bit of admin. I have a Goodreads account and I barely ever mention it. If you want to keep up to date with what I'm reading, I try and update it as I finish a book. And want to see kind of like what I think about a book, then follow me on there or friend me on there. Just wanted to quickly explain how I do my star system because it might seem a little bit harsh, but I do it, I think it's the way Goodreads recommend you do it. So 1 star, I really hate the book, and if I hate the book that much, I probably didn't finish it. Like, that rarely happens that I find nothing redeemable about a book. 2 stars, it was okay, but nothing special. Like, I didn't find anything I particularly liked. Yeah, it was alright. 3, it was a good book. I enjoyed it. I'd probably recommend it to people that I know would like it. So that's probably 2 and 3 are probably the majority of books I read. 4, I thought the book was great, like really, really good, really enjoyed it. But obviously very few books are perfect. And 5, I thought it was nigh on perfect. Couldn't find too many things I didn't like about it. So that's my rating system. That's how I judge my books on there. But anyway, that's enough rambling. I know that was probably enough for a whole video in itself. but I'm going to talk quickly about the Luminaries. I read this months ago. I think I read the entirety of it in April, which is pretty good going, but it was quite a long time ago now. So it's about lots of people. It's the big cast of characters, almost Dickensian, and it's got a slightly archaic prose style to match its setting, because it's about New Zealand in 1866. It's about the arrival of a Scot called Walter Moody, who's come to make his fortune because there were a lot of gold fields at the time, and when he gets there he kind of discovers in this small town a number of mysteries. So a wealthy man has vanished, a prostitute has tried to end her life, and an enormous sum of money has been discovered in the home of a luckless drunk who has died. So it's a little bit of murder mystery as well. And this mystery intertwines about 12 people. Yes, 12 local men kind of come together to bring all of their different accounts together to help solve it. It's a lot slower than I'm making it out to be because it builds very slowly. I've actually written no notes on this, which I'm really, really annoyed with myself about. Actually, that's something else that I wanted to talk to you guys was about annotation. I have been watching some booktuber videos recently about annotation, and I've always felt that it is like a sin to write in your books, but I'm beginning to think like it would be really useful to annotate my books for reviews and stuff. At least do some underlining and some like little tabbing. And I just wanted to know, what you guys thought of annotation. I haven't got up the guts to do it just yet. Back to this. I thought the first like 100 pages or so, maybe a little bit more, were really really set the scene and were kind of tense, and I was really intrigued by the mystery. And I think Catton's kind of emulation of that like Victorian prose style was really accomplished, and I really liked it. In lots of ways this book, especially the beginning of it, really reminded me of, what's that one called that I read? Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I don't know whether it's both because they're big thick hardback books that I have. They both emulate that kind of old-fashioned style, and that one's slightly more kind of not magical realism, but towing the line of magical realism. But this one definitely could have gone there. So it has that kind of mysterious element, which I thought was really well done at the beginning. And then it began to drag quite a lot. So one thing I really loved about the novel, and which if I'd had the time at the time, I would have read more about, is Catton's use of astrology. I think it's probably woven more closely into the novel than even I recognise, because lots of characters are like linked by their birth charts and stuff, and there's little astrological charts at the beginning of some of the sections as well. And I think if I were to analyse those, they'd reveal quite a lot about the novel, and it uses a lot of, you know, the kind of Victorian doubling thing. There's a lot of that going on. So yeah, that's where the kind of slightly outside of the world of realism stuff comes from, and I think it's really well done and really nicely interwoven into the novel, to the point where you think, wow, I could really like get my teeth into this if I wanted to. So if you guys ever want to write a English lit essay or something about astrology and the zodiac, then this is your book to go to. And I think Cynthia, who emailed me, kind of felt similarly to me. So the mystery kind of just dissolves for quite a lot of the big middle section of the book, and it just becomes quite a, she said, convoluted, unbearably convoluted storyline. I didn't find it unbearable, but it is a little bit hard to follow all the different men and keep up with the storyline, and it is very intricate in that sense. And then it kind of brings back that element of mystery again at the end. I think Catton's a great writer. I think she clearly understands characters, and she really did some great characterisation in the book. But yeah, it doesn't keep you interested throughout the whole thing. However, I did enjoy it. I got through it pretty quickly for such a big book at such a busy time, and I think I would recommend it for anyone that's interested in like contemporary writing that tries to do something with that period of history. I've never read anything set in New Zealand around that time, so I found that interesting as well. And yes, there are lots of good parts of this book, but it wasn't like perfect. So yes, that is the Luminaries. I'm going to leave that aside now. Well done to any of you guys that got through it, because I know it was a big one. And thank you for reading along with me if you did. Right, I'm just going to go in whatever... Oh, actually, I have one book that I haven't got physically, which I didn't buy because I read it on my Kindle, and some of them I did go ahead and buy physical copies of, but this was not one of them because I didn't love it, didn't hate it. So it is, of course, Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I thought this book was fine, but there were some things I didn't like about it. It did make me cry, and it was like an engaging read, but there were lots of things that I didn't like about it. I'm sure you guys, lots of you guys are familiar with the book. I'm really sorry if you liked it and I didn't. I just think some of the writing was a bit uneven, some of the characterisation was a bit uneven. Like, she would say she would never do something, and then 20 pages later she'd be doing it. Quite obviously. I mean, I know she's supposed to be an unreliable narrator, but there was just some like points where I was like, nah, that's not really working. I thought it was a strange handling of trauma. Like, sometimes I just thought it wasn't as delicately handled as it should be, or should have been. It was one of those things that's kind of like designed to make you cry. And then some of the comedy elements of that kind of personality I found a bit uncomfortable. So yes, that's my very quick take on Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. It's such a tongue twister, that one. So speaking of trauma, we've got Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina. I cannot speak today. Dorothy Allison's Bastard Out of Carolina. So this is set in the 1950s. It's kind of semi-autobiographical. It's about a young girl called Bone. Obviously she's not called Bone, but that's her nickname. And about her big family and all the kind of family dramas, and living with her mum, who is single and then remarries a couple of times. Definitely before you read this, be aware this is a trigger warning for like sexual abuse or abuse, because Bone's stepfather is very abusive towards her. Lots of parts of this novel are extremely uncomfortable. Now, I have a bit of an issue with like the way trauma is sometimes used in novels, but in this case I think it works well. Like you guys know, I didn't like A Little Life because I just thought it was trauma porn designed to make you cry, basically. Whereas in this one, yes, it's in there, but it's also about, like, it's a characterization of Bone and her family. There are some really touching, moving parts. There's some funny moments, there's some light moments, there's some little adventures that Bone goes on. So yeah, be aware of the content of this novel if you're going to read it. It's really a great book in my opinion. I just really like Allison's kind of writing style. The way she creates Bone, she makes her really just... She makes you very close to the character, and really sets the scene of her family in Carolina amazingly well. Next up we have The Vegetarian by Heng. So this is obviously quite a famous novel, famously good novel. This was winner of the Man Booker International Prize for 2016, and this novel wasn't what I was expecting at all. So the blurb says it's a darkly beautiful modern classic about rebellion, eroticism and the female body. The novel is told from the point of view of a lot of people, I think, apart from the protagonist, who is a woman who suddenly overnight becomes vegetarian because of a strange dream that she's had, I think. I read this quite some time ago. I think I read this in a day. And it becomes clear that she kind of wants to become a plant, or become plant-like. So she starts off by not eating meat, and then she continues on until she's not eating anything at all. It's kind of about her psychology, but also about like society's expectations for her as a woman, as a Korean woman, and the kind of cultural implications of her actions. And yeah, it's very kind of eerie and haunting, this book. It's kind of like pared back in such a way as to make the whole thing kind of more dramatic. So yeah, I enjoyed this. It's like a perfect little read. You could do it in a day. It's very kind of tightly wrought and raises some interesting questions about nature, about women, about bodies, about all sorts of things, about art. So yes, I enjoyed this one. So next I've got a lot of books by Octavia Butler. This one here has got 4 books inside it, like 7 books by Octavia Butler. So Octavia Butler is a famous sci-fi author. She was quite prolific during the 1970s, 80s and 90s. She wrote a lot of books. I rarely read like lots of books by one author in a short space of time because I'm always trying to move on to the next thing, and it was quite a nice thing to dive into her oeuvre, do a little bit of an in-depth Octavia Butler moment. I really like her writing. I think she has been very influential on a lot of sci-fi and fantasy authors, particularly in the African American community because she was African American herself, and she's kind of like the godmother, I would say, of a lot of the literature that's coming out at the moment. Let's do this in kind of the order I read them. So I read, can't remember which one of these is first. So Parable of the Sower comes first. So I'll just read the blurb just to remind myself and you guys. When unattended environmental and economic crises lead to social chaos, not even gated communities are safe. In a night of fire and death, Lauren Olamina, a minister's young daughter, loses her family and home and ventures out into the unprotected American landscape. During that time, she creates a new faith, like a new, hence why it's called Parable of the Sower, like a whole new belief system. And essentially, I think the idea is that God is change. Yeah, so it opens with all that you touch, you change, all that you change changes you, the only lasting truth is change, God is change. So that's the basis of the belief system. And I thought this novel works really, really well. They're super readable, and it's possibly a little too simplistic at times when it comes to some of the more complex concepts. Like I think she could have pushed them a bit further. And I find this in general with Butler's writing, I feel like she can always just push that a little bit further. Like the religious concepts are really interesting, but it's just not pushed quite far enough. I wrote in my notes, I've got very few notes about this, but I said it takes Lauren a little too long to get out the compound. So obviously I just read you the blurb, and it's supposed to be, she's supposed to kind of leave the compound and go on her adventure, but it takes a while to get out of it. I wrote that it was a page turner. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed this idea of like her creating a whole new belief system. I thought the world that Butler created was very believable. It was kind of set in like California when there'd been like severe environmental crises and like political ones as well, so that set the scene really well. I enjoyed this one, and then the second book I enjoyed less. So this is Parable of the Talents. So Lauren by this time has a daughter, and she started a new community that's trying to keep safe from all the kind of banditry and everything that's going on around her, because she used to live in a gated community, now she doesn't. So they're kind of trying to create a mini oasis where she can build her new religion. And I literally think there is a president depicted in here who says like, let's make America great again. So Butler basically predicted Trump in that sense. And it's kind of about Lauren's like neglect of her child in favour of her religion, which I think was quite an interesting tension. And it was interesting to see how Butler wanted to take that belief system, which seemed quite strong in the first novel, and kind of make it a little bit warped and suddenly ask questions, like more questions about like what it means to have a religion and everything like that. So I thought that was interesting. In fact, I did enjoy this, I think. I just thought the first one was a little bit more even. Like this one kind of jumps around a little bit more. It's a little bit bigger. Anyway, I enjoyed this too, and if you're looking for kind of like post-apocalyptic fiction, or like what might happen to the world were we to face like a severe environmental crisis, then these are really good novels. So the next selection of books, so this is 4 books. This is her Seed to Harvest series, which contains Wild Seed, Mind of My Mind, Clay's Ark, and Patternmaster. So she wrote these in a different order. I believe she wrote Patternmaster, which is the last one, first. Then she wrote the second one. Then she wrote the first one, Wild Seed, and then she wrote the third one, which is confusing, but it's important because Wild Seed, which is one of the last ones she wrote, is excellent, like really, really, really good. I loved it. I thought it's a really interesting concept. I'm just going to try and remember now what happened in it, but I remember thinking, right, this is going to be great. These 4 novels are going to be great. It's about 2 immortal Africans called Doro and Anyanwu. And Doro is a spirit who can take over other people's bodies, killing the person inside, but he can kind of wear other people's bodies. And Anyanwu has lots of different traits. One of which she can shapeshift into animals. She can change gender, and through this kind of control over her body, she has a really good control over healing. And the novel follows them over like hundreds of years, I think, and he kind of tries to control her. So like the way it moves over time, so you see lots of different time periods, the way the Butler kind of manifests the like interesting powers that a lot of the characters have and the implications of those powers, and the like battle of wills that happens between the 2 immortal characters. That's all really interesting. Then we have Mind of My Mind, which I thought was okay, but already it was losing kind of some of its magic for me. So in this case, Doro is basically just trying to breed telepathy into people. And it kind of just sits as like a middling novel, like it's definitely part of a wider story. It doesn't really work, it wouldn't work on its own. And then we've got Clay's Ark, which is the next one, which is where I kind of started to lose interest a little bit. And basically there's this, Clay's Ark is a spaceship that comes back and it brings like a deadly alien virus which takes over people's bodies, and by this point Doro and Anyanwu are out of the story, I think. And then finally we have the first one she wrote, which was The Patternmaster, which I thought was okay. I think it was better than Clay's Ark, but it's essentially then set in the distant future. So most of Mind of My Mind and Clay's Ark take place kind of now-ish, and then The Patternmaster was set way in the future, when the kind of either you're like a mutant Clay Ark alien virus type thing, or you're someone with immense telepathy. So as you can see, I've just tried to explain it to you guys. It's quite complex and very uneven, but I would definitely recommend reading Wild Seed. It's kind of like historical fiction, fantasy, sci-fi, all of it mixed together. And finally we have Kindred, which is one of her famous novels. It's about a modern, like a contemporary African-American woman who has this like strange connection to one of her white ancestors, her white slave-owning ancestors, and she keeps being transported back in time, and she has to save his life every time, even as he becomes crueler and crueler towards the slaves on the plantation. Yeah, she continues to have to save his life in order to save her own life. It makes for a really interesting story. There doesn't need to be an explanation of how or why someone ends up being like linked or bound to one of their ancestors, but I did find that bit a little bit like kind of devoid of all explanation. You don't always have to have an explanation for everything, but it just seems kind of like random, like why this ancestor, why at this point, why Dana. So none of those questions really answered. So yeah, it's definitely, again, very compelling, very readable. She writes really just, I wouldn't say conversationally, but it's very like direct, which is nice. So that's my Octavia Butler section ended. I would definitely recommend reading some of her novels to those of you guys who are interested in sci-fi and fantasy, but particularly kind of like the background to Afrofuturism and African American sci-fi writing. I think she's like a super important link in a lot of that writing, so I enjoyed reading her books. Onto a fantasy, we've got Clariel here, which is a young adult novel. So basically, I don't know if I've ever talked about it before, but I love Garth Nix's Sabriel, Lyriel, Aporson trilogy. That series is honestly excellent and so inventive and unusual. The world is really intricately wrought and just amazing, and I loved them. This, however, is a huge disappointment. This was released a few years ago, 2014. It's supposed to be a what am I trying to say? Prequel to those books set about 200 years before. But honestly, guys, it was not good. It's about a girl at court, basically. So I wrote down in my notes, I'm just going to read it out actually, because I think it'd be quicker and easier than me trying to paraphrase myself. So it's been a while since I read the Old Kingdom series, so it may be that I'm reacting to some of the more young adult parts of the novels. I did reread, because I read them when I was like 10, then I reread them when I want to say like 17, I'm not sure. Anyway, but as a reviewer put it, the Old Kingdom, that's what they're called, the Old Kingdom novels move between a 1920s world and the Old Kingdom. And the magic is just better integrated, better rooted in that world. It's quite an interesting contrast to have that like 1920s thing going on. Whereas in this one it feels like a more lightly sketched world. It feels like a more typical fantasy world in like a not a good way. It's kind of just like set at a court and there's magic. And Clariel is really unlikable, like really unlikable. If you loved the Old Kingdom series, don't read this. You don't need to. There's nothing about it that's good. Right, we've got Attica Locke's The Cutting Season. I've just realised this is a crime, and I said the other day that I don't remember the last time I read a crime, but I have read a crime. And this one disappointed me a little bit. I was expecting a lot from this. It is about a murder that happens on a old slave plantation in Louisiana, and it kind of follows I think she's like groundskeeper, like manager type person of this plantation, and it follows her as she kind of tries to work out what's happening and who's done it. Yeah, I just found this as a crime not very, it wasn't a great story in the end. Like, it set the scene well, and then again it just didn't deliver or follow through. So it's a kind of formulaic and predictable thriller, I said, and I don't know what I was expecting, but the nuances and subtleties of a murder on a Louisiana plantation were handled rather ploddingly. Ploddingly is not a word, but yeah. There could have been more of something, whether it be a more nuanced indictment of contemporary society, an examination of the modern day role of the plantation turned museum, a kind of more interesting thriller story. But then I guess, is there an issue with writing a thriller based on the plantation? I'm not sure. Anyway, it didn't quite work for me. Someone on Goodreads said, this is more notes from me, that the prose and atmosphere didn't fit the storyline and ending, because she really creates atmosphere very, very well, but it just doesn't fit the kind of plodding storyline. I'd be interested in reading the one Blackwater Rising, I think Attica Locke wrote. That was supposed to be really good, so I'm gonna maybe read that. Have any of you guys read it? If you have, let me know what you thought. Okay, next we have one that I really liked. This is 1,000 Acres by Jane Smiley. So this is a retelling of King Lear through the lens of an Iowa farmer who is dividing his farm between his 3 daughters. All sorts of dramatic things happen. Sorry, I'm reading from my notes a lot today, you guys, just because I'm trying to remind myself. I kind of completely wiped my brain for my dissertation, so I'm just trying to remind myself of how I felt. So, I said this is a classic good American novel about the psychological depths of a rural Iowa farming family, but it's done so well, you guys. It's just, it kind of like, as the novel goes on, it kind of peels back layers. It's told from the point of view of the middle daughter, I believe, maybe the oldest daughter. So in lots of ways, I've read some god-awful review of this, which completely misunderstood the novel. Which was like, the kind of father figure, or the King Lear figure, is not shown to be nuanced enough, and the daughters are shown to be like too nuanced, and I was like, that's the point, mate. Like, this is supposed to be like a feminist, I read it as kind of like a feminist retelling of King Lear from the point of view of the daughters, which I found just like fascinating. But anyway, as it goes, like, it peels back the layers on each of the character, particularly the narrator, to the point where it gets like so tense and so intense, but it's still all very like believable and realist and like good, like classic American novel fare. So yeah, I loved this. So I wrote that it's about women's labour and it's a subtle feminist retelling, but again, that's not advertised anywhere, which I think is quite clever in a way, because it does reveal the kind of reviewers that are unwilling to take on board the nuances in the female characters of King Lear. So it's also about America in the early 90s and the way kind of like farming technology was changing things and how things were changing in the economy and in farming. I really like this, and this is probably one of the ones that I would most recommend out of everything that I read the past couple of months. Right, this I have a copy of Suicide Club, which I was sent for review and ended up not really liking. Set in a near future New York, life expectancy averages 300 years. Immortality is almost within our grasp, and what I wanted it to do was to really look at what it means to live for that length of time, kind of how the human lifetime, how like that breadth of time really affects the way we think about the world. That's what I wanted it to do, but it really did none of those things. So it was a bit heavy-handed in the description of its world, like it just threw up, you know when writers like just throw in like words for institutions and stuff that just feel really forced. The world building is not very subtle. I said it lacks the subtlety of really good fiction of this kind. And then in other ways it seems really half-formed. So I said, why doesn't the author explore the real consequences of living for that many years, or contrast it to a typical human lifespan, or the ways that memory performs here, like how you forget your previous self, or maybe you reincarnate yourself, or the links between your body and your mind. I can only think of one passage when she talks about memory, apparently. The characterisation is really uneven, like it has a strangely violent protagonist, but that violence is not linked to the fact of her living for too long or anything like that. She just seems violent, and she also seems like generally otherwise completely normal. So it just seems like she's violent and that's it. I said it seems to all be building up to that idea of the violence of an overextended life, but with little actual probing of that idea. Obviously it's about a group of people that decide to commit suicide as opposed to live their overextended lives, and I wondered what the implications are of using suicide as a plot device like that. It kind of seemed to be sometimes hinting at the idea of science not being as rational as we think, but again that wasn't fully explored. It seems simultaneously dictatorial and also very lax in this society, which seems a bit uneven. There were some logical holes, and my final point was no one really feels 100 years old reading this. Like no one, the characterization doesn't feel like I'm reading the voice of an 100-year-old. So basically I think Rachel Heng just wanted to kind of look at the Suicide Club idea, but she just doesn't it's just not pushed far enough. So that's my review of Suicide Club. Right, we're down to our last couple of books here, you guys, we're getting there. I have American Gods by Neil Gaiman, which is a big old novel. It's been made into a TV series which I haven't yet watched, but I've actually got the TV series cover, which I'm pleased about for once in my life. When I bought this there was another cover available there and it was just shite. Like as I said before, sci-fi covers always get the worst deal, so I quite like this cover. It's a little bit more, this is how I would do like your sci-fi fantasy covers. So this is kind of like a surreal, dreamlike, I don't want to say romp because that word is always overused in reviews, but like it's like an episodic look through America through the eyes of gods. It's really hard to explain, especially when you're like 12 books deep. It's told from the point of view of a man named Shadow who's just got out of prison. His wife has just died and he is basically approached by one of these gods, and he gets wrapped up in their world, wage wars against each other and battle each other. There's the new gods of technology and the old gods, and that's kind of the way the battle mostly plays out. It's looking at like what makes America basically, and he travels around lots of different parts of America, and yeah, I thought it's a lot more nuanced and subtle. It can be a little slow in some points and it is a bit surreal and dreamlike, which annoys some people. got an enormous cast of characters. Shadow meets all sorts of people. It's fairly cinematic, I would say. Like it would lend itself well to like a TV show or a film. So I'm not surprised they've made one out of it. It reads in that kind of, in quite like a dry, knowing tone, which I liked, and I liked it. It's very intricate. I'm sure I could read this again and find lots of interesting symbolism and things going on in it that I didn't catch the first time round. And it's a really interesting concept. It's nothing I've ever thought of before or come across before. Do you guys have any other Neil Gaiman recommendations? Because he's a pretty famous author. Yeah, all sorts happens in this book, absolutely loads. So I would recommend it. Obviously, be wary. There are obviously representations of people's gods and belief systems here, so I'm not sure entirely if all of them are like favourable. So finally we have Samuel R. Delany's Neveryóna. He is another sometimes overlooked but great African-American sci-fi fantasy author. He mostly writes sci-fi, but this one is fantasy mostly. Kind of fantasy, like a sword and sorcery type of thing. You might remember I reviewed so the first in this series. This is a series of 4 books. The first one's called Tales of Neveryóna, I think, and this one's obviously Neveryóna. The first one is a book of short stories, kind of, that all sort of interlink. It kind of does that kind of in-between thing. And I think the other 2 that come after this one are also groups of stories, but this one reads more like a novel about a girl called Prynne. And I didn't enjoy this one as much. I really enjoyed the first one. So in these books, Delany really kind of toes the line between cultural criticism and criticism in general, like philosophical criticism and fiction. So he's kind of doing like he's kind of theorising as he writes fiction. So they're quite overly intellectual, sometimes a little bit pretentious, and they'll definitely strike some people as pretentious. I personally think because of the setting he's chosen, which is like a barbaric, like pre-civilization, pre-writing sort of place, it kind of works. And I really did enjoy the first selection of stories, but this one I just didn't like as much, and now I understand why he made them short stories in the first place, because as a novel it just doesn't sustain properly, because it's not really about Prynne or Prynne's characterization or anything. It's kind of about the things that happen to her that allow Delany to explain some things. There's a lot about kind of like post-structuralism in here, language, history, storytelling, capitalism, and it just doesn't work as a novel form, I don't think. Plus this one was way more critical theory based than the first one, like even more so, to the point where I was like, am I reading an essay? Do I want to be reading an essay right now? I'd rather be reading like a piece of fiction. So it depends. If you kind of know that going in, then I think this would make a good read, like an interesting theoretical read. As it was, I just didn't enjoy it as much, didn't find it as enjoyable. But yes, they're really interesting books. I'm still going to read the other 2 that come after this one. I want to read some of Delany's other stuff. So if you guys have any specific recommendations, because he also was a prolific writer, he wrote loads of books. So yeah, I want your Delany recommendations back. I'm just going to read the blurb because I don't know if I've explained that very well. So, in this chronicle of a long-ago land on civilization's brink, possibly in Africa or Asia, Gorgic the Liberator's slave revolt gathers toward its conclusion. A richly written novel of myth and literacy, Neveryóna tells how young Prynne, who can write in this largely pre-literate land, flees her mountain village on a dragon's back for Neveryóna's capital port Kolhari to aid Gorgic's rebellion. Prynne finds more answers and questions about Neveryóna's power structure. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I know this is an epically long video, I imagine. I feel like I'm losing my voice somewhat, but the next one, next book video I do, I'm definitely going to be able to go into more detail. But yeah, I want to know your thoughts on annotation, because I really want to be able to write really good reviews. Does it help you? Do you review books? Do you find it really helpful when reviewing books? If you review books, how do you mark up your novels? Do you mark them up? I want to know everything. So let me know, you guys. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Well done for reaching the end of it if you managed it. I hope you found some new reading material. Lots of good books, got lots of good books coming, and yes, we've got The Giver and Normal People as our book club books. Anyway, you guys, I'm going to film my book haul now, so stay tuned for that very soon. Bye!